Thanks, Tom. Hi there, I'm Kelly Davis with MHA. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm really excited to be joined today by three awesome advocates who've been working with their communities and with Born This Way Foundation to make a difference in the lives of young people. So let's get to know each of our panelists. First up is Alyssa Lee. Alyssa is an intern for Born This Way Foundation, a reporter for the Center for Health Journalism, and a doctoral resident in occupational therapy at University of Southern California. Her goals in life include improving health equity, creating a kinder and braver world through the written word, and making the best Taiwanese beef noodle soup in Los Angeles. She holds an MA from USC and a BA from UC Berkeley. Next up is Cheyenne Kippenberger. Cheyenne is the current reigning Miss Indian World and is from Seminole Tribe of Florida. With her platform, Cheyenne is bringing awareness to the strength and resilience of Native American and Indigenous peoples, helping to destigmatize mental health, and working towards gaining quality representation in the media for Native American and Indigenous people globally. And we have finally Allison Kurtz. Allison has been challenged with multiple medical issues in her young life, including a life-threatening kidney disease. Despite that, she tried to live as a carefree adolescent, filling her days with reading, gaming, and surviving grade school. And yet every day she felt like she was living a life meant for someone else. Allison is transgender. Since transitioning, Allison has fought her way back from depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation to pursue her dream of being just your average college co-ed. As a national ambassador for Children's Miracle Network and as a patient advisor for Cincinnati Children's Transgender Youth Clinic, she spends her free time advocating for more funding to support LGBTQ youth. So to get started, I wanted to open up a dialogue to learn more about each of you. So since I introduced you first, Alyssa, I'll start with you, and then we'll move through Allison and Cheyenne. Tell our audience a little bit about yourself and what led you to where you are today as an advocate.
Yeah, hi. So lovely to meet you all. My name is Alyssa. I use she, her pronouns. I really started my mental health advocacy journey through this platform that we started in college. So it was called 475 nanometers perceptions on mental health. It was a psychology class that we were taking. They asked us to do a 3% of our grade, like pay it forward project, where we would like make brochures or like speak to a class. And my friend and I decided that we wanted to create like a Humans of New York style platform for people to share their stories. We didn't want to go up to people and just ask, oh, like, what's your experience with mental health? And so we created this volunteer form, and kind of like how college students sometimes are, we did it very last minute, like the last week of finals. And we were surprised to get like 10 to 15 responses, like in a very short period of time. And then during winter break, we forgot to turn off the form, and 50 more stories popped up in our Google form. And we just realized like this was something that people needed to talk about. This is something that people resonated with. So we would go and interview the people for their stories, or they would share their stories via written word, and I would go and photograph them. And it was just really impactful to see like the amount of people, like I know a lot of people like that I looked up to, like were able to share their stories. And you know, sometimes you feel like everyone has all their stuff together. But I think it was a really first like look into like, you know, I'm not alone, everybody else is going through something as well. Since then I'm in school to be an occupational therapist. And so going through my clinical rotations, I realized mental health is so relevant in every setting. And I did one rotation in community mental health where people with a lot of my patients would tell me, oh, I have this, I have that. And then they tell me their stories and what they've gone through to go there. And I don't know, just like being able to witness that and kind of understand people's resiliency has been really impactful. And so now I'm glad I get to be an advocate as a researcher, as a clinician, as a journalist, as a friend, a loved one, as a trauma survivor myself. Yeah.
Awesome, thanks for sharing. I think, you know, the thing that came up repeatedly in your intro was really the power of representation and sharing stories. And I know, Cheyenne, in our intro, we talked about your work, particularly with representation and more stories and positive media coverage for Native American and Indigenous populations. So I was curious if you could share a little bit about your work in mental health and how that fits into your advocacy.
Happily. Well, I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to meet everybody. Cheyenne tamo chohochifke Cheyenne kotom yaketishe chohochifke itotom anyata te kuarotom semenokotomne. And so in our traditional way, we always introduce ourselves in our native tongue. And so what I just said was hello to everybody. My English name is Cheyenne. My given name is Ite, which translates to fire in my own language. And I'm Seminole through and through. But I guess I could say my advocacy for mental health really began way before I was ever Miss Indian World. It kind of started with myself and realizing there's a lot of stigmatization in general about mental health and talking about it, but especially within the Native and Indigenous community, it's very, very stigmatized. And it was, you know, a tough journey, but I finally was able to kind of shed that burden of shame, you know, feeling, just feeling any type of shame about it. And I speak very openly about my journey with my depression and anxiety and seeking out help, as well as, you know, having to be on antidepressants, which is, you know, not something that's really spoken about within my community. And so before I was Miss Indian World, I was representing my own tribe, specifically as Miss Florida Seminole, and I realized that there was a conversation that we really needed to start having. And I realized that as Miss Florida Seminole, I had not only a responsibility to serve as an ambassador and represent, but, you know, I needed to help, you know, push this issue forward. And so through Miss Florida Seminole, I really found that I had a voice, and that, you know, speaking out can be impactful, and it helps to let other people know that they're not by themselves. And this is actually something that's very present, not only in our community, but all over. And going into Miss Indian World, it was something that I really wanted to prioritize, and, you know, breaking it down to just specific to my community itself. You know, we have a very different way of going about things emotionally and in that aspect. And so it was really important to me that I keep pushing that conversation. Let's keep normalizing these things. Let's, you know, make it a household conversation between parents and children, and how we can do that in a healthy way. And so, I mean, I'm very proud that I've been able to really take my own journey and share it, and, you know, just make that something that it's okay. It's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to talk about it, and it's okay to be upset, and there's nothing wrong with you. And so I love what I do. And because of this change of perspective and how it is that we can normalize these things, I mean, it's even gotten me to the point where I want to change what I'm going to school for, because I realize accounting may not be for me. But I'm really, really excited, and I can't wait to hear what everybody has to say today. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Cheyenne. I know you mentioned the importance of lived experience at MHA. That's definitely something that's really important for us. MHA was founded by a man named Clifford Beers in 1909. He was diagnosed with what would be called bipolar disorder now, and had a lot of horrible experiences in the old mental hospitals of the time. So, you know, we totally share and believe that lived experience is so important in driving how we support people. And I want to turn to Allison to get to know a little bit more about you and your lived experience. I know you do a lot of advocacy around your experiences being transgender, so would love to hear kind of your story and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, I'm Allison. I use she, her pronouns. And I honestly started activism specifically focused on transgender activism because it's such an issue right now, and because a constant theme I was seeing as I went to groups and talked to other trans people was how hard transition is, because of how you have to come out to people, and because of the toll it takes to be seen differently and to be separated into a sort of out group. And that's sort of when I learned that I can't just campaign for transgender acceptance. I have to campaign for mental health acceptance too, because these issues aren't separate issues as much as they are absolutely entwined. Because I've met an abundance of trans youth who just talk about mental illness as if it's a totally, we all have to deal with it, and that's never going to change, and nothing's going to get better. And it's a joke to them because it's just how things are. And I kind of came to terms with how how horrible that is on a concept, that we have to sort of make jokes of ourselves in order to make ourselves more palatable to people as a whole. And that's where I started talking about mental health and transgender awareness. I consider it a duty of mine to make sure that life for other people like me and other people not like me to have a much easier time going through their mental health journey, as I'll put it, than I did. Because I have had a long history of issues with mental illness. I have been hospitalized. I have had a lot of run-ins with that. I've been in partial hospitalization and had to wait a long time through the system for lack of funding and space. And so I know just how desperately this needs to be spoken about and how desperately this needs to be normalized to the point where it's not a joke and is actually something we treat as important as like medical diseases. And thanks for the opportunity to be here. And also I am dying because I had to turn off my fan for better audio.
Thanks, Allison. It's awesome to learn more about you all. So we heard a little bit about your stories and how you got here, but it's hard to ignore what's been happening over the last few months. It's been very intense for everybody in a multitude of ways. So I'm wondering to hear from all of you about how you're doing. And, you know, it's easy as advocates or as, you know, people who care about people to take care of others and to really put all of your energy into activism and advocacy, but also curious about how you all are taking care of yourself too.
Well, I'm taking my care of myself in the best way that I can, which is to say I have had to totally self-isolate because in addition to being trans and having issues with mental illness, my entire family is high risk. And I have kidney disease, a kidney disease, polycystic kidney disease. And so does everyone in my family except for my mother. So we are all high risk. If we caught the virus, then I don't feel like I need to say the outcome because I feel like we all know it, but you know, I would die. And so I have had to forego the typical college experience for my sophomore year, along with my brother, my older brother, who's in his last year. I had to I had to cancel my dorm plans. I rented out a small house with my brother that has no heating or no cooling, which is super great. And so I have just been totally quarantining, and it's been rough, but it's also been survivable. And it's kind of a cop-out statement almost, it sounds like, because it is so regurgitated by every company on earth, but it's so amazing to see everyone getting through this. And it is amazing to see the tenacity of the human spirit as a lot of us come together and just try to stay together for being able to push through this. I personally have just been focusing on that aspect of it in order to get through.
Oh, I definitely feel you on that. It's definitely been tough. I've definitely had my ups and downs through all of this, whether we're talking about mental health, physical health, spiritual health, you know, it's all been affected. And it really just feels like all of our lives, you know, we're living in this, you know, normal bubble, and next thing you know, somebody just came and like ripped the rug out from under all of us. And so I know all of us have gone through some challenges with trying to, you know, navigate this really weird transition of, you know, not being outside, not being able to be around people, you know, our jobs are changing. And if anything, I think I'm really thankful for social media, and I'm thankful, you know, for FaceTime. And, you know, we always say it's a blessing and a curse, but this is the time that I really can sit here and say that it's been a blessing. And, you know, it's been hard. We've had to see our own family members and friends and relatives and everybody have to work through this, whether that be, you know, from home or actually out there working. And so, I mean, you know, as tough as it has been for myself, I really can't complain. I feel incredibly blessed, and I'm just thankful for being able to still connect with people, even if it is through my computer camera. And, you know, I take it one day at a time. And I've really, really been taking advantage of the fact that I still have access to my therapist as well. I've been really focused on trying to balance my health and my wellness. And so I'm really, really trying to make sure that I'm doing something physical every day, whether that's like sit-ups in my living room or, you know, something. But yeah, I do. I feel very, very blessed. And I'm just thankful that we're able to do, you know, even things like this.
Yeah, I resonate really deeply with what you both said. I really love this question. I feel like as people who are advocates and help people in the helping profession, we don't get asked this enough. Yeah, I feel this very similar to Cheyenne. I feel very lucky that I am able to work from home and I'm able to be here and tune in and talk to people such as you all and my friends and my family. It's also, it can be really hard, I think, to be so far away from everyone. I was really lucky this week to be able to come and help my sister move. And so I'm actually just like shunted to the very side of all the moving boxes right now in the corner. But really, really grateful and really blessed to have that opportunity to help her there. As an occupational therapist, I think a lot about like habits and routines and all the things like that our everyday lives allow us to have, like, you know, just walking to my car every day is like the exercise that I kind of built into my routine, and just trying to find ways to like regain some of that normalcy and like go for a walk in the morning before class, or like do a little walk from home in my living room. Yeah, like just to get ready for the day. Also, like, I think as you both have touched on, like the connection with other people and how to continue connecting with people through social media or through FaceTime, I think has been really important during this time. I think I've also realized being on Zoom all day gives me a little bit of a headache. And so how do I build into like doing phone calls instead, even though a lot of my friends would prefer the video component. Yeah, so just, we're all here surviving. We're all here surviving together, and I'm proud of us.
Alyssa, on that note, the next question that I wanted to ask you all is, what would you say to people who are new to the world of mental health advocacy or who are just starting their personal mental health journey?
It's hard for me to sound like an expert, you know, imparting advice. I think for everyone knows themselves best, and everyone is there, like, you're an expert on yourself, right? Like, you're the most expert on yourself than anyone else. And as you take things one step at a time and learn to listen to yourself more, I think sometimes you can be surprised to find new things about yourself. And some of these new discoveries are fun to find, and some of it really does give you hope for the future. My partner recently started therapy too, and I think one thing we've thought a lot about is like trying to keep yourself from comparing your journey to other people. The idea that like your path is your own path and it has its own logic and its own reasoning to it, and as long as you believe in it, you'll do great.
I really, really love that you touched on that, because I think when I first started my own journey, I was like, okay, like this is textbook how it's gonna go. Like I got this, you know, there's like however many stages, and in reality, it is nothing like that. And, you know, just kind of how we've all mentioned before, there's like, even just through this quarantine, there's been ups and there's been downs. And now looking back at my own journey, which is still continuing, you know, because we're all going to keep, you know, continuing with this journey towards healing and towards wellness. It's never going to be like a straight path. And there's no wrong way to do it, and there's no textbook right way to do it either. And, you know, and I also love that before you mentioned that you're going to learn new things about yourself. And it really is like that, and it's still like that. And I even have to constantly remind myself that, you know, even being in a position where we are considered advocates on mental health, we still don't know it all. And we just try our best, and we try our best to share the information we know, and, you know, to spread education and to, you know, talk about our own journeys. But, you know, at the end of the day, behind closed doors, when we're going through these things by ourselves, it's not always pretty. And so I always kind of like have this joke with myself where I'm like, just ugly, cry it out. Like, it's okay. And I think that kind of hits it right on the head, where it's like, it's not always going to be pretty, but it's also not always going to be ugly. And, you know, there's just no right way to do it, and it's going to be all right. And I encourage everybody to just continue towards moving forward towards your own healing, and just to remember that your path is going to be very different from your partner's path or your friend's path or even your own family members, but it's going to be all right. And, you know, at the end of the day, we're a community of people, and, you know, we just have to be kind to each other, be loving to each other, but we also need to be kind and loving towards ourselves and give ourselves that same understanding.
Also, I love that so much. Every time I'm going to start listening, I'm going to hear you say ugly, cry it out.
My response, I feel bad because I continuously say this. I feel like I don't even need to be on panels anymore. They could just get a soundboard of me saying this, but it's my immediate response, both on a personal level and on a social level, is to talk about it. Talk about it, talk about it, talk about it. Because on a personal level, it will make you feel better to talk about it and help you get through your own understanding of what's going on. But on a social level, talking about the fact that you are going through this can cause, it's such a butterfly effect. It can cause such a change in the world around you, correcting people, talking to people about it, spreading the word. You are explosive. Everything you do has an effect. And I don't think enough people realize that and take that effect into their own hands. You have an opportunity to change the world with every action you make. And so for your own sake and for the sake of the world, talk about it.
I'm so jazzed, Allison. I'm so excited. I'm ready to go. So wanted to move into some individual questions for each of you. Allison, I'll stay you know, on your note about talking about it and the importance of your work starting out in transgender advocacy and moving into more mental health and transgender advocacy. How have your experiences being transgender affected the way you navigate mental health care? But then also, and what inequalities have you seen specifically in your community that people might not know, particularly if they don't have that lived experience?
Well, the first thing that immediately comes to mind is how, like, mental health is in such weird position in the trans community, because on one hand, it is incredibly, incredibly important to be focused on because being trans is a difficult thing and going through transition is a difficult thing. But on the other hand, there's something of a stigma to it sometimes for some trans people because it has been weaponized against us in the past with people telling us that what we are is a mental disorder and that we are wrong in the head. Go to therapy, like, not to get better for yourself, but for them to tell you that you were wrong. And so there's this sort of stigma around that I think is incredibly important, not only to dispel amongst trans people themselves, but also to dispel in the public eye as a whole. There's just, it's entirely different and yet the same, the way that we approach mental health. There's a different lens, but the same frame.
Thanks, Allison. So I wanted to ask a question of you, Cheyenne. Somewhat similarly, as a member of the Native community, what kind of inequities do you see that directly affect folks in your community? And then what can non-Native clinicians and members of mental health care community more broadly do to ensure that there's adequate resources available and also making things better as well?
I really, really appreciate this question because as Native, as American Indian, Alaska Native, or Indigenous, or just Native people, I feel that a lot of the time, sometimes we just get left out of the conversation because there's such a lack of representation in practically all realms of our life. And, you know, especially being Miss Indian World, one of my responsibilities is to represent all Native and Indigenous people globally. And so, I mean, just a little bit of pressure, but, you know, just specific to my own community, you know, we are very, very blessed in the sense that I have access to a Center for Behavioral Health literally right up the road from me. But that is not the scenario for many other communities all over the US. And so to try to sit here and really represent to the extent that my people, I feel like, deserve is difficult because there's over 500 federally recognized tribes. And of those over 500 federally recognized tribes, and that's not even including state or locally recognized, all the communities are different. And so I may be right smack in the middle of a very busy city, but you know, sometimes there's communities that are 3-4 hours away from the nearest city. And so the largest disparities, I think, that are the easiest to talk about is just accessibility. You know, being able to have a mental health facility to go to, having resources, having funding, you know, there's a large lack of those things within Native communities all across the US. And so, you know, I think even, let's say we do tackle that and we start building these facilities all over, in and out of schools, on and off reservations, you know, making them more accessible and, you know, making it to where we even have those things available to the Native community. How do we provide culturally competent care while also, you know, being able to provide these things? And so what's so important that non-Native clinicians and mental health professionals need to know, what's so important is that if you are going to be working with our community, there needs to be not only a historical understanding of our people, but also there needs to be a cultural understanding of our people. And you know, it goes so much deeper than that, because I may be Seminole and we're from Florida, and you know, our traditions, our language, our ceremonies, our clothing, regalia, everything is different from a tribe that's in North Dakota or a tribal nation that's in California. And so that historical and cultural understanding, it needs to go so much more deeper than just, you know, the lens of what's American history. It's like, no, what is Mandan, Hidatsa, and Rickarott history? What is Bishop Paiute history? What is Choctaw history? What is Seminole history? And what are the cultural teachings and traditions of this specific tribal nation? And that is how we can provide the Native community the care that they deserve. And the fact of the matter is whether you're looking at the Native community, the Black community, no matter what group of people you're looking at, mental health care should not be a privilege. It should not be a privilege. That accessibility needs to be there for people, because everybody deserves this. Wellness and health is a human right that we have as people. And so we deserve to be healthy physically, mentally, spiritually. And so we need to have that access. We need to have these programs, these facilities. We need to have culturally competent care. But yes, like I said, I really appreciate this question because it's just representation. And I know we account for I think it's, if not 2%, less than 2% of the population. And so, you know, just to give a little bit more context into that. But thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Cheyenne. I love everything you said. I think, you know, we talk about supporting folks and providing more culturally competent care, but we also really need to be breaking down the structural and systemic barriers that prevent people from communities who are being talked about as needing culturally competent care from being providers or being, you know, organizational leaders or being policymakers. So I think that there's a lot of local level work, but a lot of structural work too. I think part of that, Alyssa, Cheyenne, did you want to respond to that?
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, absolutely, you know, it's not just the local level, but it's really like going up through all the levels of everything. And it's really just taking that understanding that mental health care it should not be a privilege. It should be something that everybody should have access to. And so how do we start breaking down those barriers? And, you know, by starting that, obviously, is having the conversation. And so this is why I appreciate even just being on this panel so much. And so, but thank you.
Yeah, and I think part of that too, this links to the question that I have for you, Alyssa, is part of being able to better understand different communities and communities that you aren't a part of is by having people with lived experience share their stories, and by having media representation of different groups of people and what it's like to experience their lives and their communities, and the ways that different things and different ways that mental health care specifically is structured that impacts them differently than maybe other folks. I want to ask Alyssa, in your work as an intern for Born This Way Foundation and a reporter, what stories do you feel like need more attention? And on top of that, what can other people who do have a platform do to help bring the voices of those who are not being highlighted to the front?
That's a really great question. I feel like I would say pass the mic and listen. I think so. I'm a reporter for Born This Way. I'm also a reporter for Center for Health Journalism. And every time I get assigned a topic or an issue, I think about who's in the room and who's in the story, and how do I intentionally bring who's not in the room or not in the story in. Yeah, I feel like it ties into, sorry, it's like my soapbox since I'm everywhere with this question. But I feel like telling people's stories is really, sometimes can be, and has historically has been changed in a lot of ways. You can see in our history textbooks how we tell the stories of the natives and how we tell the stories of transgender and how we tell the stories of everyone else who's not in the room. And so a lot of my work, I think, with Born This Way has been, how do we do it in partnership? How do we bring in people to tell the stories themselves? How do I check in with them and make sure this is something that they want to be on the record and something they want to talk about? And just being really intentional on that side. I think a lot of it is from my work as a clinician too, and thinking about like, how do we bring in culturally responsive care to communities? And number one is probably recruitment and retention of those communities to be healthcare providers in the first place. And how can we make that happen? Yeah, I sit on the diversity committee on our national board and also at our university. And a lot of what we discuss is the recruitment and retainment, but also how do we build in, how do we build it into the curriculum as well for the time being? And how do we bring in subject matter experts to come in and share their stories and pay them for their work to share their stories and share their expertise and leverage the cultural wealth that are in these communities to dismantle systemic racism and systemic health inequities.
So thank you all so much. I wanted to close out with one final question for everyone, and that is, what do you hope for your future advocacy work? Where do you hope your advocacy work goes from here? Or what gives you hope in the world of mental health?
I think being an advocate and being an Indigenous woman, my vision for, I guess, what I preach and what I share and everything is that one day mental health care won't be a privilege. And that if, one day somebody wakes up and they say, I think I'm going to try therapy today, they won't have to jump through hoops to be able to do that. I hope that they'd be able to go to a facility, make a phone call, and it won't be something that is so difficult to be able to do for themselves, and they'll be able to get quality mental health care, where there aren't these inequities of cultural understanding or any type of misunderstanding at that. And so I really do believe, though, that with the work that everybody on this panel is doing, we're going to reach that goal one day, and we'll be able to see that. And I'm hopeful for that.
What gives me hope about where I want my advocacy to go is the fact that we are talking about this, that we are able to have a platform for it, and that people are willing to listen to it, and that we have such people that are at the forefront of our field willing to talk about this, and not only willing to talk about this, but being able to talk about this in a way that is so amazing and like gets the point across perfectly. It has been a struggle to stay professional during this call, because during certain lines, like Alyssa, you talking about passing the mic, and Cheyenne, you talking about how it should be a privilege and not a right and not a privilege to have access to mental health. I had to fight so hard to not just like pick up my bottle of antidepressants and start shaking it like a maraca. Everything here gives me so much hope for the future, that we have people, we are 3 people who are talking about this. There are millions of us who have the ability to talk like us and their own thoughts to say on the matter. And so this isn't stopping here, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. We are going to keep on thriving, and that's all I could want for the advocacy that I do and the advocacy that everyone else does.
I think one of my favorite questions to ask is what do you imagine, what is a world without stigma to you? And I feel like the way you both answered it, I don't know, I just felt like I saw the painting of what is to come in front of my eyes. I think what really inspires me is to be able to see Allison and Cheyenne, all of your advocacy and continuing to advocate for your communities and for everyone. I think just seeing the kindness in the world. So I started with Channel Kindness back in 2018, and Channel Kindness is really born out of the idea that a lot of the stories about young people tend to be negative, we're lazy, we're this, we're that, and a lot of the news media is negative and catastrophe after catastrophe happening, which is which is true. But being able to find the little things, like look for the people helping and look for the people advocating. I think this year I've also found that we're learning to be kind in a lot of different ways. And kindness isn't just I think there's a generic idea of what a random act of kindness might look like. But kindness can really be to yourself, to your family, to your community, to the world. My friend has this really great tattoo. It says, the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking landscapes, but in having new eyes. And so I feel like the way we've expanded what kindness looks like is not just like a job title. There can be everyday things that you do that are intentionally kind. And we need to open up our eyes to see the kindness that is happening around us and all the opportunities for kindness as well.
I really, really appreciate this conversation, especially just because of all the different experiences and aspects and everything that we've been able to share and exchange. And I just want to say that I'm really honored to have been on this panel with all of you, and I'm super proud of you guys. And I know that we weren't able to come together in person, but like virtual love, and I really do see great things coming for all of us and all of our communities. And I have a lot of hope for the world. And I think that, just being able to focus more on the kindness and the good stuff as opposed to everything else that goes wrong in the world is a lot harder to do. But I think we're up for the challenge, so.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank Alyssa, Cheyenne, and Allison for joining us today. And I also wanted to take time to thank our partner, Born This Way Foundation, for this panel. Born This Way Foundation is committed to supporting the wellness of young people and empowering them to create a kinder and braver world. So thank you all. And for folks watching, we will be right back.